All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being patient as we got started. We have a great panel for you today. My name is Anthony Willen. I'm the owner of The Collective. We're a residential and commercial brokerage in greater LA area. As you know, we have our multifamily meetup group that typically meets once a month, but right now we've been meeting twice a month because there's just so much important information that we want to make sure that we get out to you guys. So today we have a topic that's extremely important, especially right now, taxes. So I'd like to introduce our director of our commercial division, Will Tiao. He's an investor himself. He is our commercial director, an amazing agent, and I'm going to turn it over to Will.
Thanks, Anthony. As Anthony said, my name is Will Tiao. I am the director of the commercial division of the Collective Realty. My specialty is in multifamily investing. I also have a property management company called Tiao Properties. We manage a little under 200 units, mostly in the Northeast Los Angeles area. And, very excited today for our topic regarding the CARES Act and the tax implications for that for real estate investors and professionals. But before we get started with that, as always, we kind of like to give just a little bit of a flavor and an update of what's going on in the multifamily industry right now, and talk about some of our kind of on-market and off-market listings, and talk a little bit about, just kind of what's happening in the market. If any of you have a want or a need, I would suggest that you put it into either the Q&A or the chat section, and we'll reach out to you. If you see a listing that you're interested in, please put your email in the chat section, and we can have that listing forwarded to you. So basically, I would want to start off, obviously, with today's a big deadline for people who are unaware, who have rental properties that are governed by the Los Angeles City rent stabilization ordinance. That is to say, if you own a unit and it's under LA City rent control, today's a big deadline. And that deadline is to send out a disclaimer to your tenants that is specific from the Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Development Board, LAHCID, which runs the rent stabilization ordinance. And it's a disclaimer. It's a one-page disclaimer that tells your tenants about their rights under the state of emergency that's been declared by, obviously, the mayor and the county and the governor. Those rights are that under this pandemic, under the state of emergency, that tenants have the right to stay in their Anthony, do you mind muting? Sorry. Those rights are that tenants basically, even if they are unable to pay their rent, which would normally be a just cause action for an unlawful detainer or eviction, during this period, those tenants cannot be evicted. That order has been extended until June 30th. But today, May 27th, is the last day for landlords to inform your tenants of their rights. And it has to be specifically the language that the city gives you. It is a form that you can go to LAHCID and download. And the reason it's important is because if you don't give them that paperwork, and then you were to attempt to do an eviction or anything later on that was not COVID-19 related, you will not be able to use your standard unlawful detainer rules. So it's very, very important that if you own any units that are under the rent stabilization ordinance in Los Angeles City, that you give this piece of paper this disclaimer to all your tenants. We have sent this to all of our tenants, hundreds of them. Luckily, we have a property management software that allows us to do it simultaneously, but it's something that I think is very, very important for anyone who has investment properties to put out there. So that's the first thing. Obviously, if you have any questions about the eviction moratorium, feel free to reach out to me directly. You can also, if you're having problems with a tenant, you should, probably contact an eviction lawyer. The eviction lawyers the landlord-tenant lawyers that I've been speaking with have basically all been saying, try to work it out. Try to work it out with your tenants. Try to come up with a payment plan. Once again, in this disclaimer, it says specifically that tenants have up to 12 months to pay back any back due rent. They do not have to sign a payment plan, but there's nothing that says you can't encourage them to do a payment plan, which is what we're trying to do right now for our tenants who are unable to pay their rent. A lot of people have been asking me what our rent collection was for the month of May. So for the month of April, our collection rate was 90%. For May, it's almost the same. We're at like 88%, 89%. So surprisingly, or not surprisingly, depending on who it is, the issue for us, we are finding, is that now some people are 2 months behind. And if they're unable to pay in June, that could put them 3 months behind, which could be, it's a big nut to crack, right? And even if you're trying to pay it back in 12 months, if you've lost your job or whatever, that's going to be pretty tough. The commercial tenants are a different story. We have some commercial tenants, and obviously they've all been shut down during this pandemic. So a lot of them are unable to pay, we've noticed. They have a lot less time to pay back. Under city rules, I believe after the state of emergency is lifted, they have 3 months to pay back. So we're seeing a lot of negotiation on the commercial lease front. So just want to say that. The other thing we are noticing is that some owners are under pressure now because, like I have, for instance, I have some owners who either had a vacancy going into the pandemic or they're having tenants who can't pay. So they're starting to feel pressure to sell. So we are starting to see some potential, opportunities for people to purchase. And so I'm gonna show a few listings right now, just to give you a flavor of what we're seeing in the market. Am I allowed to share my screen? Okay, great. Okay.
Also, while Will's going to be sharing his screen, just note that we do have a poll up. If you are a property owner, we're polling you to find out what do you expect as far as collecting rent for the month of June. So in a couple days from now, how much rent do you expect to collect? And we'll share those answers with you in just a couple minutes.
So this is a duplex in the neighborhood of El Sereno, which is in East Los Angeles. And it's 2 units. They're both 2-bedroom, 1-bath units. The top unit is a long-term tenant. They've been there for almost 50 years. So they're paying very below market rent. The bottom unit is vacant and has been completely renovated. You can kind of see from the pictures, brand new appliances, new floors, new air conditioning, everything. We've listed at $525. If we are estimating the rents in that neighborhood for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath are in the $1,800 to $2,000 range. We're saying that if both units are rented at market, it's a 10.96 GRM or 7.35 cap rate. Very centrally located. This gives you a look at some of the numbers. You can see the rent that the long-term tenant paying is $675. It's actually a little bit, I think it's like $679 or something, but it's, very close. At $525, so we've already gotten a number of offers, and we're in the process right now of reviewing and responding to those offers. So if this is something that you're interested in, please let us know. I'm happy to send you this flyer and to arrange for a viewing. The next property I have here is a 5-unit that's been completely renovated. It's turnkey, meaning like the property has been completely renovated top to bottom, and they're gorgeous. It's a very great mix. So the top, this is a 4-plex in the front, and then there's a single house in the back. The top 2 units both have 3-bedroom, 1.5 baths, and those are both rented at market at $27.75. The 2 bottom units are 2-bedroom, 1 baths, and they're on the market. They're on the market for lease for $25.50 each. And then the back house is a 3-bedroom, 2 full baths, and it's large. It's about like 1,500 square feet, and it's a house, and that's on the market for lease for $35.50. It's in Westlake, just south of Echo Park and Silver Lake, very near downtown Los Angeles. At market, once you get all the market rents, you're going to be looking at a market income of $14,225 a month, gross income of $170,700 a year. So that's a cap rate of 5.39 and a GRM of 14.12. I will say that these types of deals right now are a little harder. They're sitting on the market a little bit longer, mostly from the financing perspective, because for turnkey properties that typically, obviously pre-pandemic, like being able to deliver a property vacant was a premium. But the issue now is the financing part, because financing has become a lot more tricky during this time. Lenders are really pulling back on anything that they consider of risk. And so it's been a lot slower than I would have definitely expected. If this had come in the market in January, I think this would have been picked up very quickly.
You're showing El Sereno. You might want to move to the next listing.
Oh, I'm sorry. On my screen it shows Parkview. Let's see. Sorry, I'll take out Twining. Oh, apologies. Try it again. Okay.
We're getting better at this.
We are getting better. Getting better. There we go. Is that, can you guys see it now?
Parkview.
Okay, there we go. So these are the 5 units. For some reason, on my screen, it showed Parkview. On your screen, clearly, it did not. So this is the 4-plex in the front with the 2 3-bedrooms or the 2 bedrooms in the front, and then single family in the back. And these are the numbers. So like I was starting to say, these types of properties pre-pandemic were moving a little bit more quickly. Now they're not, and so I think my owner is in the process of trying to lease them up as quickly as possible so that he can show the income. Because previously, like I said, it would have been a lot easier to sell these, to sell it vacant. So I'm gonna get rid of that one, and I'm gonna show one final one, and that is, let's see here. One final, here it is. This one I'm really excited about. This is, I have not listed on the market yet. This is off market. This is a 30-unit single resident SRO, single resident occupancy. That is to say, it's kind of like classified as a boarding house. There's 30 studio rooms. There's 7 shared bathrooms and a communal kitchen. It is prime Boyle Heights. First and Boyle, across the street from Mariachi Plaza, across the street from the Gold Line. Literally, like, and the rooftop view to downtown Los Angeles is pretty amazing. 25 of the units are being delivered vacant. So if you were to rent them at a market rate, which we're assuming $950 a room, which we did a market survey and that totally fits into the market, you could get a market GRM of 8.76 and a cap rate of 9, a 9 cap, if you can believe it, in Los Angeles. It's pretty incredible. The property is in pretty good shape. The bones are there. You know, we're just starting to push this out there. So you guys are amongst the first people to really see stuff like this. So
can this be used like as a rehab facility?
yes. So in fact, what happened? The previous the previous master tenant was a rehab clinic, basically a rehab facility.
Okay.
They were renting the other 25 rooms, and they were also managing the 5 kind of older, longer term tenants. And so she had a double net lease here. I've definitely got people who are running those types of things. You know,
it's a great business, really great business.
Great business.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and the fact that 25 units are being delivered vacant is really huge. I think this one's going to go very quickly, even though it is, like I said, even though this one is primarily vacant, 25 units, but because it's a value add play, I think this one is going to go very quickly. So I'm already, you know, getting a lot of calls about it, even though we just started the off market marketing for it. So something for you guys to consider. Like I said, I mean, a 9 cap is just like, you know, you don't hardly get that anywhere, much less, you know, never get that in Southern California. So it's something, and that's we're assuming that you're not doing much to it. You're just literally basically filling it up, versus like actually fixing it up. That's a different story. So if anybody has any questions about any of these, we're happy to discuss. Let's go quickly through the questions. My friend is, the first one from Jessica. My friend is looking for a commercial property for lease in Culver City, restaurant zoning. Any suggestions on where she can find listings for those types of availabilities in the coming months? I would say your best bets are, you know, LoopNet and Crexi. I actually just signed up for Crexi, which is a commercial real estate site that's being a competitor to LoopNet CoStar. And I find their platform to be really strong. So I would definitely look on those 2 sites. So LoopNet and Crexi, and that's crexi.com. From Ray, is it worth it to get a historical listing Mills Act for tax savings that can be used for maintenance? That's a very interesting question. So first of all, the question is about a Mills Act. Now, a Mills Act property is a property that has to be classified as such, like that a property has historical value, and that value, you know, it makes it so that, you know, what is it? Like there's a value to the city and to the county and to the world, basically, that people keep it within, you know, the historical, you know, nature of that property. So first of all, it has to qualify to be a Mills Act property. If it does qualify, there are certain rules regarding the Mills Act, whether or not, you know, the types of improvements that can be made and cannot be made. There can be a tax savings, sometimes a fairly significant property tax savings. I think that's something that you should really consult a land use, either consultant or attorney, to go over what your it depends very much on the property. So that's what I would say. But Mills Act can be really great if you're looking for that tax savings, but you do have to consider the flip side of what that means in terms of what you're able to do with the property. Probably means you probably can't develop that property. So those are things you want to consider. Only LA City. Oh, you're talking about with regards to the disclosure. That's correct. That is an LA City disclosure. Now, every city and jurisdictions have their own disclosure rules. So if you have properties in West Hollywood, in Glendale, in Santa Monica, you know, wherever you're at, if it's not LA City, they're going to have their own disclosure rules. But what I'm talking about is within the city of Los Angeles. That is correct when it came to that specific disclaimer that I was talking about earlier. What is the status on LA County reopening phase 2, I think? That's a bigger question than maybe I'm qualified to answer. But I can say, at least with regards to the eviction moratorium and the state of emergency with regards to that, I would say that June 30th is the state of emergency for the eviction moratorium has been extended to June 30th. And they're talking about possibly extending it later. There was actually in that same vote, there was talk about extending to August 31st, but they voted against that and they voted to do it on a month-by-month basis at the end of June. So that's where we're at right now. And Riverside and Orange are in phase 3. Yeah.
Just a little touch on kind of where we're at in LA County, real estate wise. Just so everybody knows, showings are allowed. There's no open houses that are allowed, but you are allowed to see properties. You just need to make an appointment with your realtor, and you need to come in with a mask and with your hand sanitizer and listen to the rules that your realtor has. But viewing properties now is allowed. That's kind of a newer thing for LA County in the last couple of weeks. So we have seen an uptick in tenants looking at properties, as well as people looking to sell properties, just having people come in to possibly purchase a home as well. So just wanted to throw that out there.
So what I will do is I will put links to the 3 listings in the chat box so that you guys can click on that. I see that some people were not able to see some of them, so I will put those up there. So now we will open the floor to our speaker, Tony Watson, who's with, even though it says Mike DeLisio on here, we should probably get that changed. Mike DeLisio also works for Robert Hall and Associates, but is not the speaker. Our speaker is Tony Watson. Tony is, becoming a little like a mini celebrity in the tax world, the real estate tax world. And we're really happy to have him here today. So take it away, Tony.
For some reason I keep getting muted. Thank you so much, Will, for having me back. For those of you who have been to the collective and seen me speak, I've been there a few times actually. You'll know that I'm the tax guy, and that I live, eat, sleep, breathe taxes. And it might not sound that exciting to you, but it's exciting to me. I get paid to do it. And there's been a lot of movement over the past 3 months, hasn't there? We've got the CARES Act that just rolled out. We've got a 2018 tax reform bill that this is actually only the second year that we filed under it. So 2019 will be year 2. And then we've also got an election coming up at the tail end of this year. And things are not, the dust essentially hasn't settled around even the CARES Act yet. A lot of things are being changed on a weekly basis. We've got the HEROES Act possibly coming in and refunding a lot of the programs that might have been tapped out at the moment. So there's a lot of movement. And so throughout the year, we're going to be offering updated educational webinars. As long as we can do it, via electronic platform, we'll go ahead and do it this way. As soon as we're back up and running, we'll do the in-person seminars. I can't wait to get back to that. Even though I love webinars, I very much love the personal touch of handshakes and talking to people in person. So today we're going to talk about the tax implications of the CARES Act, what real estate and small business professionals should know and what to look out for, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, number one. Well, there's a lot of information out there, and then there's a lot of misinformation, people interpreting the information incorrectly, and then obviously people who are using outdated information. So this is being brought to you, the most up-to-date information as of today. Things could change tomorrow. So on the bottom of each one of my slides, I do say that the information can change without notice or without warning. So just keep that in mind.
Can
Yes.
you give us your contact info? I just want to put it in the chat and on our Facebook because for some reason we had another name. I just want to make sure everybody gets your correct info.
Sure. It's Tony Watson, and my email is tonywatson@roberthalltaxes.com. And our contact number is 818-242-4888. I actually have a slide throughout the presentation that will tell you how to get in contact with us. So I'll put it up as well. So just to start off with, just to show you who we are and what we do, the Hall family right in the middle there, Stephen, Bob, Janice, and Robert Hall, very much a family-run business operation since 1971. We do taxes in all 50 states. We only have one location here in Glendale, California. So, but we do taxes once again across the U.S. We service about 15,000 tax filings per year, anywhere from the big real estate development corporations to syndications to the person just getting into real estate, the person getting ready to buy their first property. So We can manage everything tax-wise from the very beginning of your investment to the very tail end. And when you're trying to enter into retirement and doing 1031 exchanges and consolidation of assets, that's where the fun really kind of kicks in. So to jump right into this, what's been happening over the past three and a half months? Obviously, COVID-19 set in, the pandemic started, and the economy just shut down. And people were fearful. They were scared to go outside. They were scared to make movements with their own financial situation. There was a lot of fear, and there still is a lot of fear. But I think that with the right knowledge, with the right information out there, it should ease a lot of your worries and just kind of pave a way for you financially and investment wise. It should kind of guide you over the next couple months. Make no mistake, this is not the tip of the iceberg, but we are just seeing a little bit of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is something that will trickle off maybe over the next 2, 3, 4+ years. I'm not saying financially speaking, not economically speaking, but things will change over the next 6, 12, 24 to maybe 36 months. So just keep yourself educated. Don't listen to too much of the whispering amongst neighbors and coworkers. Go to your financial advisors, go to your tax professionals, go to your real estate professionals, and talk with them. Get information from knowledgeable professionals, the people who study this, okay? So today we're gonna talk about, I put together this short list because over the past 3 months, our phones have been ringing off the hooks, and I tried to consolidate all of those phone calls into 5 categories of what people were really fearing, what they wanted more information about. And so we're going to talk about the PPP and the EIDL loans to start with. We're going to talk about mortgage forbearance quickly, and then we're going to talk about accelerated depreciation for rental property owners, and then just briefly for a minute or two touch on the stimulus checks and the risk of identity theft in today's economic climate. Like I said, at the very bottom, this information is subject to change without notice. So a lot of the information will be changing over the next couple months. The CARES Act was passed, and they fine-tuned it. I mean, things were changing literally as of a week and a half ago with part of the EIDL loans and the PPP loans. So just be aware that things are going to be changing over the next couple months. The PPP plan stands for Payroll Protection Program. A lot of people thought that when they were applying for the PPP plan that they had to have employees, that they actually had to have people on payroll. And that wasn't the case. In fact, in a webinar this morning that I was giving, one of the questions was, well, I thought that the PPP didn't apply for contractors. And actually the PPP applies to essentially anybody who has an active participation business, whether you're a sole proprietor, just you working as a business owner, or a restaurant owner who has 15, 20 employees on their staff. So when you were applying for these loans, you were under the impression that this amount that was coming in was going to help keep people on payroll, whether it be paying you your payroll to keep you on payroll with your business, or to keep your employees on payroll. That was the main point of the Payroll Protection Program, was to keep people employed and to keep them off of unemployment or from claiming unemployment. So one thing that I just want to say straight out the gate is that if you apply for PPP and you get the money, do not apply for unemployment, because they contradict each other. The Payroll Protection Program was meant to keep you employed, whereas unemployment is stating that, hey, I'm getting this benefit because I no longer have employment. And so there's a lot of confusion around that. If you apply for both, there could be a situation on either end where either California requests that you pay the unemployment back, the unemployment benefit that you're getting as a contractor, or the PPP amount that is technically forgivable all of a sudden becomes not taxable, but becomes an actual loan with a 1% interest rate. So let's take a couple steps back and talk about the PPP loan first. How did you know what you were going to qualify for? How was the calculation made? It's actually a very simple calculation, to be real honest with you. It's taking, just for numbers purposes, taking 12 months of revenue, okay? It's 12 months of income through your business. Let's call it the 2019 tax return. And let's say that your business, after all expenses were taken into account, let's say your business in 2019 profited $120,000. Well, $120,000 is easy to divide by 12 months. That's why we're using that number. So $120,000 divided by 12 months gives you $10,000 of profit per month. And so the Payroll Protection Program calculation was taking your monthly profit from 2019 and multiplying it by 2.5. Now that gave you a $25,000 Payroll Protection Program amount that you would qualify for. It's a pretty simple calculation if you're a single member business owner. You don't have to be incorporated or anything. This is really just the calculation for the sole proprietor. If you had employees on payroll, if you had an assistant that you were paying on payroll out of a corporation that you owned, the calculation is a little different because you have to take into account the actual payroll that you're issuing. But most of the individuals that we dealt with were actually just single business owners, the real estate professionals who operated just under their social security number. And so taking that 120, dividing it by 12 months, multiplying it by 2.5, which was the estimated time frame that the economy would be shut down. That's where that 2.5 came from. That would give this individual a $25,000 PPP loan. Now, within 3 days of an accepted application, that's when the money was supposed to be wired to your account. So let's say that $25,000 came in and automatically you're thinking, well, I need to spend this on certain business expenses, but put the brakes on just for a minute because you actually have to use that money for very specific expenses. A major portion of the loan, for instance, 75% minimum of that $25,000 PPP loan needs to be spent paying payroll. Now, if you have payrolled employees, perfect. You could just pay out your employees. You could pay 100% of the loan out as payroll as long as it's consistent with what your payroll had been under your business up until the time that you were affected by the economic downturn, by the pandemic. If you're a single member business owner, meaning that you don't have employees, it's just you, technically you would have to look at your monthly revenue from 2019 or 12 months leading up to the pandemic occurrence, up to like the first week of February. And let's say that that monthly profit was $10,000 for you, that 120 number that we were using. At $10,000 a month, that's $2,500 a week. And so the federal or the SBA loan is meant to supplement over a 2.5-month period for you enough to cover your loss of revenue, your loss of profit over a 2.5-month period. And so obviously $25,000 divided by 8 weeks, that gives you $3,125 per week. You can either pay yourself the $3,125 per week, or you can use 75% of the loan, use that to pay yourself as long as it's consistent with what your net revenue has been over the past 12 months. And then 25% of it can be used for other business expenses like paying for rent, paying for your health insurance benefit, anything that was a consistent, ordinary, necessary business expense that you were incurring up until the time of the economic downturn, the economic shutdown. So just be aware that there are very specific rules about what you can use that money for. You can't just go out and buy a new car with it. That's not an allowable, forgivable expense. And the reason why you want to play the game right to the T on this particular loan is because the benefit here is that when you get this $25,000, if you utilize that money for these specific expenses, the loan does not have to be paid back. And that's the definition of a forgivable amount, right? The federal government doesn't include it as income. SBA doesn't expect you to pay it back. And as long as you use this money to pay for these allowable expenses, it becomes a forgivable amount for your business. Here is where the general misconception lies, that because they hear the word forgivable, because taxpayers hear the word forgivable, they think that it's not taxable. And here's the kicker. It's not income to your business, and it's not money that's going to be taxed to your business. But what are you doing with that money when you receive it? Well, if you're a single business owner, aren't you turning around and paying yourself or compensating yourself with a salary to keep you employed under the Payroll Protection Program relief plan? So when you turn around and you pay yourself, you just paid yourself either a W-2 wage or compensation that will be taxable to you personally next year when you file for the year of 2020. So it's not that the loan is not taxable. It is forgivable. You don't have to pay it back. But when you turn around and pay yourself, which is a requirement of this loan in order for you to qualify for the forgiveness of having to pay it back, when you pay yourself, it becomes compensation for you, taxable compensation. So this is where a lot of misinformation is that people say, oh, it's not taxable as long as I use it for these things. And that's not the case. It just means that you don't have to pay it back to SBA. Now, if you don't use the money and spend it on the 75% payroll, 25% for overhead, don't worry, because whatever money you do end up keeping after that 8-week period, it converts to a loan with a very, very low interest rate of 1%. And the first payment doesn't have to be made for the first 6 months after that period. So just understand that even if you aren't able to spend it all on those allowable expenses, it's a 1% interest rate. Also remember that because you're using money that technically isn't yours, it's a loan, and if you use it for the forgivable and allowable expenses, you don't have to pay it back. But under the old and new IRS code, it states that if you are utilizing money that is from a forgivable loan to pay your business expenses, you also have to take into account that you're not going to be allowed those expenses as write-offs on your 2020 tax return because you didn't pay for them. SBA did. and you don't have to pay it back. So technically you didn't have to pay for any of these expenses. So the IRS says, well, therefore you cannot deduct the expenses. So just be aware that there are a couple scenarios that you need to take into account when you're doing mid-year or year-end planning for your business, when you're calculating your estimated tax payments. If you're adjusting it saying, well, I made less income and I'm going to have all of these deductions, just kind of take a step back and realize that a lot of these expenses you didn't pay for. It was actually the PPP forgivable amount that paid for it. So just be aware of these particular situations that you might run into. The application was pretty straightforward for PPP. There is still money available for PPP, so you can still go ahead and apply for it. And the 8-week period, this is what changed. I said earlier that things are changing literally on a weekly basis. About a week and a half, I think just under 2 weeks ago, the payroll protection program before that date, you were required to utilize that money over the 8 weeks following the first date the loan was funded, meaning that if I got the money today, I had 8 weeks from today to spend that money on allowable and forgivable expenses. They went back and adjusted and defined it a little bit better and stated that, well, if you're only used to paying yourself every quarter, or if you're used to paying yourself every 6 months, or if you're used to paying yourself on a certain time frame, technically you can wait to start payroll to keep everything consistent. And so therefore, if I'm technically not really required to, or haven't in the past paid myself until the end of June, well, technically my 8 weeks doesn't have to start now. This is what was defined over the past 2 weeks. I can actually start that 8-week process in June when I normally pay myself. So once again, it doesn't have to now be the 8 weeks directly after you receive the money. It can be any 8-week period throughout the year, as long as it's being consistent with the way that you paid yourself or earned money in the past. Very, very complicated, right? This is all stuff that you need to map out with your financial advisor, with your tax advisor, and figure out, hey, am I doing all of this correctly? Because at the end of the day, yeah, the PPP loan is a huge benefit and you do not want to have to pay it back. That's the whole point of this PPP, is that as long as you utilize it for these expenses, you do not have to pay it back. And we need to control the amount that you're actually taking as compensation for yourself, because it has to meet those requirements. Impact of loans and taxes on future lending. The PPP does show up as a loan for your business. And at the moment, I don't think it will impact in future years for lending purposes. And remember, this is the PPP loan, not the EIDL loan, which we'll talk about next. The PPP loan is really more for a business. So if your business is applying for other types of debt, let's say your business or your corporation owns a property that you also run your business out of. This happens a lot with dentistry practices, for instance. This may affect your ability to acquire more debt for the business. But individually speaking, you as a sole proprietor shouldn't really be impacted by that, especially because it was a forgivable loan. If it converts to a regular loan, yes, it could actually impact your ability because it converts to a debt for you that you have to pay back with a very, very, once again, low interest rate of 1%. So just be aware of that. There are two factors of the PPP that people sometimes get confused. There's the employee retention benefit of the PPP plan, and then there's the employee retention payroll credit. They are two completely different things. The whole benefit of the PPP plan was meant to retain employment, was meant for you not to have to lay off your employees and to keep your business up and running, even though your employees couldn't come to your place of business. That was the employee retention purpose of the PPP plan. But there is something called the employee retention credit, which is actually something that you would apply for through formal payroll. Now, for the single member business owners who don't issue payroll to themselves, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to qualify for this. This is something that if you have a corporation and you're actually paying yourself on payroll, you're actually cutting checks with federal and state and Social Security, Medicare withholding from those checks, you can apply for a employee retention credit, which is up to a $5,000 credit for you as the employee, or $5,000 per employee. This is something that you'll be able to apply for with your accountant or through a payroll company. I know Paychex is running a lot of free educational seminars, webinars nowadays, and they're talking a lot about the employee retention credit and how you can go ahead and apply for that benefit. So just keep that in mind. There's two different things: the employee retention purpose of the payroll protection program, and then the employee retention credit that has to do with payroll credits. So just be aware of those two options. The payroll protection program was the one that really started, helping businesses kind of relieve them of these ongoing expenses. But remember, the main purpose was to keep people on payroll. You don't have to hire back the same employees if you've already let them go. I mean, you should go out and retain their services. But if they're already starting to collect unemployment, what we have some clients running into is that their employees are actually making more through unemployment than they are working for the business. And this is kind of like a catch-22 for them, because they want to hire this employee back, but Obviously, the employee has to do whatever's most beneficial for them. So if they choose not to come back for work, yes, you do have to continually try to rehire people. And if you aren't able to do that, just make sure that once again, the allowable percentages of the loan are being expensed on the right deductions. And once again, a tax advisor, financial advisor, a wealth manager can probably assist with all of this. So just keep that in mind. The other loan that people were very, very confused about was the EIDL loan, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This was the one that could be up to $2 million at one point. Or people started hearing about a grant or an advance of the EIDL. The EIDL and the PPP loans are two completely different things under SBA. At the moment, PPP still has funds available. EIDL, this particular loan, is not accepting new applications at the moment. They have stopped the application process for the time being, for the foreseeable future. And that's what the HEROES Act is supposed to refund. They're supposed to replenish EIDL so they can start loaning out money again with the SBA. So really, there's just a timing issue with that. We don't know when it's going to pass. We don't know when EIDL is going to be refunded, but that's what we check up and we update on every week. So loan forgiveness with EIDL is not the same as PPP. EIDL loans, you actually go out and spend the money on payroll costs and on rent and on mortgage interest payments and business business debts. You can use the money basically on anything that's business related because this is an actual loan. It can be up to $2 million. At one point, it was up to $2 million. When EIDL started realizing that they were running out of money during the first round of financing, under the second round of financing, only about a month, maybe a month and a half ago, they decided to drop the loan limit from $2 million down to $150,000 max. So that means that if they do reopen up EIDL, the max loan that you're going to be able to apply for is $150K. The reason why it went so fast is because there were a lot of $2 million loans being given out. Now, these are not forgivable loans. You actually have to utilize this money for business expenses. And even though it's a crazy low interest rate, 3.75% over a 30-year term, so it's a great deal for the most part, but it is not a forgivable loan. So meaning that it actually does require credit to be run. You do have to leverage assets. You have to prove to SBA that you are going to be able to pay this loan back. It's not like the PPP plan. Now, once again, the payroll protection program had a couple subcategories. The EIDL has actually two subcategories as well. There's the EIDL loan, full-blown loan, where they run your credit and they do all this other stuff, and it actually shows up as a debt which could impact your future ability for qualifying for financing. So that's one loan. And then there was something called the EIDL grant, which was $1,000 per employee that you could qualify for. So on the application, and this was super confusing for a lot of people who were going to their bankers and applying through their bank, is that their bank would just file one application, when in fact they were supposed to file an application for the EIDL loan, and then they were supposed to file an application for the EIDL grant. Sometimes what we saw over the past couple months is that bankers or financial advisors were filing both on behalf of the client didn't even know. So what they were getting was the EIDL loan, which was the big loan, right, at 3.75%. That was great. And then they were also getting this $1,000 deposit. If you're a single business owner, for instance, the grant is $1,000 per employee. Well, if you're the only employee of your business, all you got was $1,000. And so clients were confused. They were thinking, well, I thought I was going to get like $100,000 of the EIDL because of my revenue, my expenses and everything, but I only got $1,000. And that's because the application was submitted for the grant or the advance, which was only $1,000 per employee. And so a lot of the money ran out quickly because people were applying for these large loan amounts at such a crazy low interest rate that it went out the door very quickly. So I'd say about a month ago now, three weeks to a month ago, EIDL, SBA shut off applications for the EIDL loans. They will open it up again. We just don't have a date yet. The approval process was pretty quick for a lot of people. Some applications are still in the pipeline because they're doing more due diligence now. They realized that along with a lot of the applicants who were filing it legitimately, who really needed the money, there were probably 10 to 15, maybe even 100x the amount of fraudulently filed applications. So they are doing their due diligence to make sure that they're just not cutting checks to people who are going to squander this money, that they're actually sending money to the people who need it. The auditing process for the SBA loans will be a grueling process on the back end. What they're actually asking now with the PPP loan is that people fill out the application and apply for the forgiveness. So you actually have to prove with the PPP loan that you spent all the money on these expenses. There's a whole application that you have to submit. With EIDL, it's a little different. You don't have to submit anything for relief because there is nothing relieved from EIDL, but On the back end, the audit process for EIDL, because there were more fraudulent applications under this program than the PPP, their auditing process is going to be very, very in-depth. They're going to go after the bigger loans first, obviously, to make sure that they were legit. And the penalty for fraudulently filing a loan application under EIDL the penalty can be up to $1 million. Okay, so when you are applying for these loans, do not just throw fictitious numbers onto the application. Submit numbers that are correct and accurate and that tie to your actual business financial statements, either a 2019 tax return or a profit and loss statement over 12 months leading up to February, the first week of February, which is when the pandemic overall kind of set in. So just be aware that there are some very, very specific guidelines you need to follow when applying for any type of loan, to be real honest with you, but most importantly with the SBA. Because the SBA ran out of money and they're not very happy about it. And now they're having to go back and kind of rely on the federal government to refund all of the, or not refund, but to replenish all of these funds because there are still a lot of businesses that are significantly being affected by the pandemic. So information is subject to change. We'll have updated information as the months go by. And we'll bring that back to you as soon as we have an update.
So Tony, just clarify real quick. I know a lot of people who apply for the EIDL loan and received between 1,000 and 10,000 as the grant. They submitted a one-page application. There's nothing they have to do now to make sure that that stays a grant rather than a loan.
Well, I mean, it should have actually come, whatever they received from SBA should have said that this portion was a grant and that it does not have to be paid back. So remember that if you got
like for me, myself, I received money in the account, but I didn't receive any contact from SBA.
How much did you receive though?
1,000.
1,000. So you don't have to pay that back. That $1,000 is a grant because you're the only employee of your business. You're a sole proprietor. If you have clients who received up to $10,000, you need to ask them, number one, how many people they have working for them. Because if they're including contractors as employees, meaning that they're not on payroll, they might have to pay that money back through an audit.
Got it.
Yeah. Because if I'm just me and I pay people 1099 out of my business, 1099 contractors do not fall under employment. In fact, they have nothing to do with your business. So if I said that I had 4 or 5 employees that I paid and they processed $5,000 of the grant into my account, that's technically not correct. And so on the back end, when they audit these EIDL applications, which, you know, for the smaller amounts, they might not even go that far in depth. But if they do, they're going to verify that you have enough payrolled employees to where you should have qualified for the $5,000. Most people were just getting $1,000 because they don't have employees. And the businesses that did have employees, they actually were going through and calculating how many W-2s they issued in 2019 or had on payroll up until the time of February 1st when the pandemic occurred. And they were applying for the grant based on that information.
Tony, I have a follow-up question because I do have a number of landlords, and myself is included in this, who've obviously lost rents during this period, right? And we assume that we could use EIDL as an opportunity to get a loan, you know, to cover our expenses during this time. Like you said, I just got a $3,000 grant, you know, for the 3 people who work on those things. Is the EIDL still the right vehicle? Because I've looked, some of my LLCs have been denied, and now when I look on the EIDL page, it says specifically that it's only for agricultural businesses. So
correct, because
it seems like it just keeps changing, like literally, like, you know, the program keeps changing depending on, like, I don't know what they feel like that day, but I'm just curious what you're seeing.
Well, they ran out of money. That's the thing. So at the moment, they've shut down all applications for any businesses outside of agriculture. If there's any agricultural business owners in the webinar, I'm sorry, but it's you can still apply for the EIDL, but you got to have farmland. You got to be a producer of actual product, right? You know, bananas or apples or whatever you're growing. But for every other business, they have stopped accepting applications as of now because they ran out of money. The HEROES Act should expand the terms of the EIDL. I don't have any legislation on that. I don't even have a PowerPoint on it because nothing's really, it passed one stage. It needs to go through a lot of other stages in order for us to even bring that information to a crowd and actually talk knowledge, have enough knowledge about it to be, to say that this is actually going to happen. We don't know if it's going to happen yet, to be real honest with you. So EIDL was really meant for, once again, for small businesses. And if you applied for it with a rental property and or a property management company and you got it and you qualified for it, great. But that went very quickly. Right now, you cannot go out and apply for an EIDL loan if you are a rental property owner. So that is not the right vehicle at the moment. Now, under the HEROES Act, you might be able to. Who knows? We don't know yet, but there will be expanded terms under the HEROES Act that might allow more relief for property owners. At the moment, mortgage forbearance has been the most popular conversation for rental property owners because their renters aren't paying their rent, right? Renters are paying their rent, and all of a sudden they're like, well, I can't afford to pay the mortgage on this $2-3 million loan because 8 of my renters are not paying rent. So the first person that you should contact is your lender. The lender is the only person who can relieve you of the stress of not being able to make your mortgage payment. Your tax advisor can't do anything for you. Your wealth manager can't do anything for you unless you have a loan with your brokerage account, like Merrill Lynch, for instance, allows you to borrow against your assets, your brokerage accounts at very, very low interest rates. And so if you can go to your broker and refinance that loan or talk to them about it, well, they're just leveraging against your assets. They're not an actual mortgage lender. They're just allowing for a more creative way to finance the deal. But you need to talk with your lender directly because they're the only ones that can really provide the flexibility that you're looking for. One thing that you need to understand, that very top line, if you can pay your mortgage, pay it. Do not kick the can down the road because mortgage forbearance, I don't even really consider a benefit. It is a relief plan for individuals, but it's not a benefit for you. It's not like you're avoiding paying your mortgage payment and that you're just going to be relieved of all 6-8 months of mortgage payments. It just accrues over time. So the first 180-day extension allows you to forego paying your mortgage for 180 days. But at the end of the 180 days, this is what you need to talk with your lender about is that, well, am I going to have to pay all 180 days of mortgage payments as a lump sum? Do I have to pay it over a 3 to 5 month period on the tail end of the loan? Will you modify my loan at that point? Will you offer a refinance to my loan at that point to wrap it into the back end of the loan, maybe extend the term by 3 or 4 years? Whatever that option is, the lender would know first and foremost. I see a lot of people going through just formal refinances right now because the interest rates are pretty low. So they're dropping their interest rates, skipping a mortgage payment, skipping a month's mortgage payment. That's been enough relief for some of the property owners, but not for all. So remember that this is just delaying the inevitable. It's not them relieving you of making a mortgage payment. And at the end of the 180 days, if you still can't afford to pay your mortgage, they will give you another 180-day extension. So 360 days total. And that's you not paying mortgage, not paying interest, not paying anything. And there's no additional fees, penalties, or additional interest beyond the amounts that you're accruing. But you need to talk with your lender about how they're going to treat that in the future. And this will impact your ability to borrow from that lender or borrow from any lender in the future if you go down this mortgage forbearance route. So just be aware that we have one, we have no case study on it, and 2, we have no legislation on it. But this is the particular benefit that the lenders are offering to property owners because they don't want to own your property. The bank doesn't want to foreclose on your property. They don't want to have to foreclose on it and then short sell it and lose money that way. They want you to deal with the property and make money off of you. So they'll be flexible with their terms, but they are the only ones that can decide that level of flexibility. So you got to contact your lender and talk directly with them. That's the first point of contact that you should be making if you feel like you're really struggling to make mortgage payments on a rental property or on your primary residence, right? Doesn't matter if it's a business, you got to figure out a deal with your lender, whether it's on a primary, a second home, or a rental property. So just be aware of that. And remember that when you forego paying your mortgage and your interest is still accruing, the bank might still send you, this is just as a side note, the bank might still send you next year a 1098 mortgage interest statement that shows the full year of interest that accrued, but the federal government will only allow you to deduct the amount of interest you actually made payments towards. So there will be an adjustment on your mortgage interest deduction next year as well if you do opt for this mortgage forbearance, meaning that if you didn't pay your mortgage payment for half of the year and then you figured out how to wrap it into the term and so it carries on to next year, you're going to have to cut your mortgage interest deduction in half because you didn't pay a mortgage payment for half the year. So these are things that you need to map out with a tax advisor. A lot of people don't know this because it's really too much detail for the media to give to you, right? The media is not supposed to really give you tax advice, but these are the ins and outs of the way that the Internal Revenue Code is written. You need to understand that losing half of a mortgage interest deduction means higher net revenue for you, but also less because you're collecting less in rent. But just be aware that at the end of this 180-day period, let's say a renter cuts you 6 months of checks, right, in rent. They say, hey, I actually was able to make all this money back. Here's all my rent. Now all of a sudden you have all of this rent, which is a good thing, but you're only allowed half of your mortgage as a deduction, half of your mortgage interest. So a million different scenarios we could talk about. Just be aware that you need to have this conversation with your lender, number one, and also talk with your tax advisor about how this may impact you when you file for 2020 in 2021. For rental property owners, one of the major benefits, I believe, under the CARES Act is the change to the depreciation write-off. Currently, the Internal Revenue, or actually before the CARES Act, the Internal Revenue Code allowed certain qualified improvement property to be fully deducted at 100%, like equipment purchases and little fixtures that you buy. You could write that off 100% against your Schedule E income. Normally, structural improvements had to be depreciated over the lifespan of the building, which is 27.5 years. Well, under the CARES Act, they actually changed that. They said that you can actually go back, if you're a property owner, you can go back into 2019 if you've already filed, and for 2020, so next year for 2020, and you can even go back to 2018 and reduce the lifespan of 27 and a half years on these large improvement deductions that you have. You could deduct it, you could reduce it from 27.5 years down to 15 years, which doubles your depreciation write-off. Now, a lot of the veteran investors in today's webinar and in the room today understand that depreciation is kind of a catch-22. We love depreciation if we never plan on actually selling the property. And I'm not talking about exchanging property for other property. If you never actually plan on selling the property ever, and you just want to kind of kick the can down the road until you kick the can by doing a bunch of exchanges, then who cares what your depreciation recapture is? But for those individuals who are thinking about selling their property in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10, and 15 years, all of this depreciation that you're accelerating, when you get ready to sell your property, the federal government reaches back into past years and recaptures all of this depreciation and forces you to pay income tax on it, unless you do a 1031 exchange. That's really the major benefit there, is the exchange of property. But with depreciation, you need to understand that this is a great benefit if it makes sense financially. I do not want all of you to leave today's webinar and go immediately to your tax advisor and say, hey, I want to amend my tax return. What I do want you to do is leave this webinar knowing that you should talk with your tax advisor to see if it makes sense financially to go back and do this. Because once again, sure, it sounds like a great benefit by going back and correcting all of this, but one, you got to think about the recaptured depreciation if you want to sell your property, and number two, you got to think about the increased risk for audit you're bringing onto your tax returns. What you're doing is you're opening up a past year's tax return to correct information and qualify yourself for a refund in a year the government has already closed out. So yes, they are offering this to you, but it also gives the government a second opinion of your tax return, a second chance to review all of the information on your Schedule E's, Schedule C's, under your LLC documents. So just be aware that if it doesn't make financial sense, if it's not going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars in tax, if it's only saving you $200, $300 in tax, let's just go ahead and take the benefit in 2020 and really try to max that out this year and get the benefit when we file next year for 2020. So these are great calculations for a tax advisor to go through with you to make sure that it makes sense for you in your specific situation. Just because your neighbor or your coworker or your parent or your child says, hey, dad, mom, friend, child, coworker, you should be doing this, do not listen to them. Okay, unless they are your tax advisor. Listen to somebody who is licensed, who is a professional in this industry, because if you go down that road and it's bad advice, you all know what happens from bad advice when it pertains to taxes, okay? So just keep that in mind. This pertains to real estate property owners as well as restaurant and retail businesses. If you own the building, this is a great way to increase deductions, reduce cash flow, and qualify yourself from either more of a refund or reduce liability, okay? Stimulus checks, just briefly, they're still being cut. If you feel like you should have qualified for a check, or if you know you should have qualified for a check, you haven't gotten it yet, don't worry, they're on their way. If you don't get it by December 31st, you actually have to apply for it on your 2020 tax return when you file in 2021. So just be aware that even if you didn't get a check this year by December 31st, we got a lot of months left of the year. Even if by December 31st you don't get that check, there's no way, by the way, for a tax advisor to call up the IRS and say, hey, you got to send my client their check. There's no way to do that. This is something that is a relief program that really has nothing to do with general taxation, general internal revenue code. It's something completely different. So you cannot call up the IRS and say, I want my check, send it to me now. You can track it online. You can even apply for the check online. But if it doesn't give you the ability to apply for it online with your routing and account information, you may just need to wait it out. And if you don't get it this year, you have to apply for the credit on your 2020 tax return. So just be aware that there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of inaccuracies with the federal government right now and the Internal Revenue Service. So just be aware that the checks, if you qualified for one, you're going to get it. It just depends on whether you're going to get it this year or next year. Okay, so just be aware of that. Keep an eye out for identity theft and anything that is fraudulent, because like I said, there were more fraudulent applications filed over the past 3.5, 4 months with SBA than in the history of the small business, the SBA division and the lending institutions. I used to speak for SCORE, which was a SBA division of Bank of America. And I talked to one of the associates that I've spoken with in the past and given seminars with, and he said, we have dealt with so much fraud over the past 3.5 months, it makes the past 15 to 20 years seem like nothing. Because people are trying to take advantage of what they consider to be free money. So just be aware of that. Aside from the fraudulent applications, look out for fake websites. Look out for people trying to get you to sign up for their deals and say, hey, listen, we can apply for the loan on your behalf, but we charge 1% of whatever you qualify for. No, that's illegal. You can't do that. You can't, I can't go and apply for the loan on your behalf and say, I'm going to take 10% of your loan amount. You can't do that. In fact, most people shouldn't even be charging for applications being filed. This is something that the banks should actually be doing for you for free. Okay, so fake websites, keep an eye out for that. Phishing and vishing, you can look up the definitions of those online. Spoofed government and health organization communication all over the place. Miracle cures. No one has a miracle cure, okay, for COVID-19. Just be very aware of that. And if you do, sell it somewhere else, okay? Fake job postings, look out for that, because when people have lost their jobs, a lot of people are trying to take advantage. They're saying, hey, send us your social security number and your address and your name. We're gonna fill out a W-9, get you all started. All of a sudden they have all of your information, your mailing address, your identification number. They can apply for loans under your social. So be aware of that, okay? How to recognize the coronavirus scams. Obviously, they insist that you act quickly. They request personal, financial, and medical information. Don't open attachments and emails. I don't feel like I don't even have to tell you that. If you don't know the person sending you the email, and even then, double check on it. And then starts off with a generic greeting, misspelled words, grammatical errors. Just be aware of that. There's a lot going on. I have family members who have been scammed over the past 3 months on Facebook. They bought, just a side note, my father bought a rolly cart for his golf bag, and it was such a great deal. It was like 80% off, right? Well, it never showed up. Right, so he paid for it online. Somebody made the money, and they're off with his money, and nobody can refund it because they show a fake delivery address, a fake route or tracking number. Just be aware. Okay. Before I go on to the next slide, I just wanted to mention also, I gave you my information earlier, but if you would like to sign up for a free consultation with our firm, with one of our tax advisors, to review 2019 or 2018's returns, or to talk about the PPP, the EIDL, go through any questions that you have, any questions, concerns, fears that you have of the tax code and what's going on under the CARES Act, or once the HEROES Act passes, text RHA to 38470, and that'll automatically submit you for the free consult. I'll show you this again, so I'm going to go on just because I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I'll show you that at the tail end here. Last time I was at the collective, I did talk about the QBI deduction. I just wanted to remind you that if you have qualified business income that you report on your return, this could be rental property income, it could be self-employed real estate commission income, it could be an online Amazon or Google or eBay business, it could be anything that generates self-employed revenue, except if you're an attorney or an insurance agency. Those are specified trade or service businesses. But as long as you are a qualified business income earner, you can potentially qualify for one of the major tax benefits under the 2018 tax reform bill. This essentially makes 20% of your qualified business income tax-free. So let me give you an example. Let's say that my wife and I are making $100,000 each in profit. After all of our expenses are taken into account, let's say we made net $100,000 each. So you add that together, married filing joint, we're at $200,000 of taxable income. Well, because we're under, if you're married filing joint, you go to the left, $321,400 is the first threshold. Because we are under that $321,400 threshold, the first 20% of our $200,000 qualified business income is tax-free. Well, what's 20% of $200,000? That's $40,000 that you do not have to pay tax on. So just be aware that you have to qualify for this benefit. So this is QBI, qualified business income. And once again, everyone's situation is different. Some people might be invested in syndications that they don't actively participate in that might not be allowable for the QBI deduction. Some individuals might own property outside of the United States and rent it out. That does not qualify for the QBI deduction because it's not a US-based property. So just be aware that it's not the Wild West. You can't just click all the boxes on a tax return to qualify you for this credit or this tax-free benefit and expect the IRS not to question it. So when you start checking the boxes, sure, it's great that you're saving all this money, but you got to make sure that you're doing it legitimately. There are a lot of tax preparers out there who did not study the QBI tax deduction benefit under the 2018 tax reform. So we are seeing a lot of questioning from new clients on old prepared returns from the IRS saying, hey, listen, we don't think that you qualify for this. Prove to us that you qualify or that you fall under these rules and requirements. So it's an easy proof to the IRS. It's just faxing a couple documents. But the last thing you want to hear, the last person or the last agency you want to hear from is the IRS. So just make sure that you know why you're qualifying for this. And obviously, if you're making well above $421,400 if you're married filing joint, and if you're making above $210,700 as a single filing individual, just you, not married, or married filing separate or head of household, your thresholds are a little bit less. But at the end of the day, don't you think it's important to kind of have a projection of your taxable income before the end of your calendar year? I mean, let's say that December 31st rolls around and I'm at $400,000 of taxable income, but I was going to go out and buy an accelerated depreciable deduction, like a new vehicle for my business. Or if I was going to max out my deferred comp, well, why don't I do that before my tax year, before my tax filing has to be filed, or the submission date, or the deadline that I have to make I have to buy the deduction or spend the money on the deduction for? Don't you think it would be important for me to know what my projected taxable income is so that I can drop myself below the threshold? I mean, the ROI, let's just use this for an example. Let's say that I'm at $325,000 and I dump $15,000 into a 401k. Well, at one point, if I don't do my 401k contribution or my IRA contribution, I am above the threshold, so I'm limited to the 20% QBI deduction. But if I throw money into a deferred retirement plan, which is dollar for dollar adjustment to my taxable income, dollar for dollar deductible, it drops me below the threshold. I get to keep the money because it's now in my retirement account. And the ROI for that investment, return on investment for that particular contribution to my retirement, could be anywhere from 42 to 55, 56 cents on the dollar, depending on what bracket you're in. So just understand that this is not meant to just throw money into an account to save you a couple $100. This is meant to save you thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in unnecessary income tax. It's the right of all taxpayers to do proper tax planning, and through proper planning, we can pay our obligation in tax and not a penny more than our obligated amount. Always remember that we have an obligation to pay tax, but we do not have to pay a penny more than our obligated amount. So just keep that in mind. Mortgage interest, still a very great tax write-off. A lot of people said, oh, well, mortgage interest is no longer a write-off for me. Trump got rid of that deduction. Well, understand that things did change under the tax reform bill, but by no means did they get rid of the mortgage interest deduction. Mortgage interest is still a great write-off, especially on business property. When you have a rental property, mortgage interest, there is no limit. If you have $1 million, $2, $3, $4, $10, $15, $20 million loan on a property, your interest is a business deduction because your property is a business at that point. So it's a great, great tax write-off. So just understand that. When you live in the home, yes, there is a limit, but there was already a limit in place under the old tax bill. In fact, under the old tax bill, you were only allowed the interest deduction on up to $1 million of debt. Under the new tax bill, it dropped to $750,000, so you're only allowed the interest on the first $750,000 in debt. That's for a primary and a second home. But if you turn around and rent out a property, you avoid that limit because it's now a business. You just have to make sure your lender's okay with you renting out that property because it depends on the loan terms, right? You got to make your lender aware of what you're doing with the property. Mortgage interest, still a great tax write-off. Whether or not it saves you just as much this year as it did under the old tax bill, it's a different story. Everyone's scenario is different. If you are married filing joint, your standard deduction now is $24,000. So that means that your mortgage interest, your property taxes, and your charitable contributions have to add up to be more than $24,000 in order for you to receive a benefit for it on your federal tax return. See, California hasn't conformed to a lot of the federal code, so your mortgage interest, property tax, charity, all still very great tax write-offs on the California side. So just understand that it's very, very unique. Your tax return is unique. It's different than everyone else's. You need to figure out how this impacted you personally. And once you dive into those details, you might realize, well, shoot, I actually didn't really, it wasn't affecting me at all. In fact, in some cases, like with property taxes, you might have actually benefited from the new tax bill because under the old tax bill, even though state and local tax deductions, what you saw on your return was a 100% tax deduction because you saw that number on your return, understand that there was a limit like the SALT deduction limit under the 2018 tax bill. There was a limit hidden under the old tax bill already. It was called alternative minimum tax, and AMT actually could have fully disallowed, depending on your income threshold, it might have fully disallowed your property taxes and state income tax altogether. Meaning that if you had paid $35,000, $40,000 in property taxes on your primary residence or a second home, if you paid $20,000 in state income tax, if you paid, $1,000 in DMV fees, all of that under the old tax bill probably in certain circumstances could have been fully phased out, meaning that you received no tax benefit for it if you were subject or fully subject to alternative minimum tax. AMT is a conversation for another day. Fast forward to 2018's tax reform bill, AMT is still there, but it only impacts individuals who make above $700,000+ of income. So you got to be a very, very wealthy taxpayer in order to be subject to this limit now. So even with the $10,000 cap on property tax and state income tax, understand that under the old tax code, you might not have been allowed any of it because of AMT. Well, now if you make under 700,000, sure, you're limited to the amount of write-off you could take. $10,000 is the max, but at least you're actually gaining a $10,000 write-off under this particular situation. Once again, very unique part of the tax code. I don't want you all to think that, hey, I actually benefited from this, because there are some people who were negatively impacted by this. Not everybody saw that benefit. Not everybody saw the negative implication. So you just need to be aware that this affected you differently than it affected your neighbor, your coworker, your family members, your friends. So just be aware of that. Now, property taxes on a rental property, is there a $10,000 cap? Nope. Because a rental property is a business, just like the mortgage interest deduction. There is no limit once it becomes a business. So this new tax bill, very, very pro-business, very, very pro-self-employed, very pro-rental property owner. And the CARES Act just kind of capitalizes on that benefit and allows you the accelerated depreciation write-offs, so on and so forth. So just be aware that if you are not maximizing these benefits, it might be because your preparer doesn't know how to maximize them, to be real honest with you. If you're a self-prepared taxpayer, maybe it's time for you to have somebody review your tax preparation skills and your tax returns. That's why we offer this free consultation. So a lot of people say, well, what else should I do? Call us. Submit for the 30-minute consultation, get on our calendar so we can help you, so we can assist, so we can advise you. Otherwise, you're kind of flying in the dark. It's not your job to be a tax advisor, right? If you were a tax advisor, this would probably take up 100% of your time, because it's a full-time job, especially under this pandemic. So text RHA to 38470. Let us take a review of your past two years tax returns, and let's advise you moving forward. Figure out if there are any strategies that we can implement to reduce liability, increase refunds, and obviously get you to pay the obligation in tax and not a penny more than that obligated amount. Okay?
Tony,
yes.
I have a couple of follow-up questions on.
We're actually good. We can go over questions now. That was my final slide, so we can open up for Q&A.
So on the PPP and on the EIDL grant, so assuming that you're going to get forgiveness on the PPP, as well as the grant for the EIDL, is that now considered income on your books? Do you have to pay taxes on that?
No. Remember that these are all loans. And at the moment, the PPP, as long as you qualify for the full forgivable amount to not have to be paid back to SBA, that's the benefit that you have there. It's not considered income to your business, but remember what I said earlier is that when you take the PPP and you pay yourself compensation, you're converting this loan into payroll for yourself. So next year, when you file for 2020, you're going to show that as payroll for yourself. So that's what you will pay tax on. It's the PPP doesn't have to be paid back, but you do have to pay tax on whatever your compensation is, just like you would pay tax if the pandemic never occurred and you were earning money. That's what you would pay income tax on. So the loan you don't pay tax on, but whatever your compensation is, that's what you pay tax on individually. The grant, the $1,000 at the moment, as of today, not taxable, doesn't have to be paid back, doesn't show up as income, nothing. It is literally $1,000 free per employee that was meant to kick money back into the U.S. economy.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about that, by the way. That is the most current information, that it is not income, it's not taxable.
Okay, very good. Are there any other questions from any of our attendees? Anthony, do you have anything?
No, I mean, again, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have at least once a month meetings right now, all on webinar, so it's real easy for you to join. LA Multifamily Meetup is the website to go to sign up for all of the notifications we do. All of our recent webinars for residential or multifamily are also posted at our YouTube page at The Collective Realty. So if you search The Collective Realty on YouTube, you'll see our page. Also, some walkthroughs of some of our active listings right now. We're just starting to build that up. It's a new way of showing properties, so feel free to check that out. Our Instagram and Facebook will always be updated with any events and anything that we're doing as well to keep you educated. It's just a big passion of our office. And again, I wanted to thank our commercial director, Will, for really helping to put together a lot of this education on the multifamily side. And also Tony Watson for coming back again to educate us. I mean, you're an amazing speaker. You have great, tremendous knowledge that I learn something new every time that I hear you speak, and I don't get bored. I like fast talkers. So thank you so much for coming back again with that. Will, anything else, or Tony?
There's just one final question. Somebody says, does the mortgage forbearance affect credit score? Tony, do you happen to know anything about that?
It could, if at the end of the 180 days, obviously, if there's, and once again, this is why you need to talk to your lender, because some lenders are finding more creative ways to alter your loan or modify your loan to where you aren't impacted credit-wise. But technically, yes, it could impact your credit score, which affects your future ability to borrow again. The 180-day extension should not impact your credit score. I think they might do a soft pull of credit just to make sure that you don't owe millions of dollars. But as far as running like an actual loan application, I do not believe that most large banks are doing that. With smaller banks, you might run into that issue, though. With smaller credit unions that aren't used to dealing with this type of situation, and if you have a $600,000, $700,000 loan with them, they may actually do a full-blown credit check, and at that point, that could impact your credit. It really all depends. It's a case-by-case scenario. I know that B of A, Wells Fargo, Chase, they've been really, really good with my clients. I don't know if they've been good with all of their clients, but every story that I've heard from my clients that I've talked to, because we're still doing tax returns, is very much, it feels like tax season nowadays, because the extension deadline brought it out to July 15th. So, a lot of the people I've been talking to have said their banks have been really, really easy to work with. I know US Bank reached out to me in March, US Bank I hold all of my mortgages with. They reached out to me just out of the blue and said, hey, listen, we just wanted to make sure we're calling our clients to check to see if they're in a good position, to see if they were impacted by the pandemic. And thank goodness I'm blessed, very, very blessed to work in an industry where I haven't been impacted by that. But I thought that was very, very unique of a bank to reach out and not try to sell me anything. They weren't trying to sell me on a refinance. They weren't trying to get me into any special programs. They were just asking if I needed a delay in making my mortgage payment. And I already knew about all of this stuff. So I just told them, no, I'm not in need of that right now on any of my rentals either. So, but I appreciated their call. And so if you're not getting that kind of customer service from your bank, it's not because you're with a bad bank. It just means that everybody in the financial world is busy right now, and that's no excuse, but you just need to hammer them. You need to call, you need to talk. Maybe you even need to, call your direct banker. I have a guy who I've known at US Bank here in Glendale for, almost 15 years. I don't have his personal cell phone, but I have his personal email, and I emailed him and I got to talk with him, and he kind of gave me the breakdown, and that's where I got a lot of my information from. And so that's been a great, great help.
Yeah, I agree. I've been in touch with all of my lenders, regardless of whether or not we needed the help, and I just wanted to get the information. And they've been also very appreciative, because obviously we give them market information. They're like, "What are you seeing rent-wise? What are you collecting?" And they want to know, because those of us who are on the ground, they need to know, like, well, what the rent collection is. And the feedback I'm getting is that, definitely the big banks, like your Chases, your Wells Fargos, like they're more quick to give a quick 3-month forbearance or whatever, just because they have so many, they can't really handle it. The smaller lenders want to know more granular information. They're like, well, tell us about what's going on with these tenants and what's going on with that.
Yeah.
It's also happening, just to let you know, in terms of purchases, right? When you're purchasing now a multifamily, they're asking the seller, okay, who's paid and who hasn't paid? The lenders want to know, It hasn't so far, and Anthony, you can correct me on this, but I have not seen it affect values so far. If anything, values have completely held steady during this time.
Absolutely, values are steady. We're seeing that all across the board in condos and homes, everything so far.
I'm not seeing that, but like I said, I am seeing pressure, because it's not just if people are not paying rent, right? It's not just about mortgage forbearance. it's the expenses, right? Like I have a client who has a duplex in Highland Park. Neither of her tenants are paying. So she's getting zero income, and we're still getting calls from the tenants for repair requests and whatnot. So, so where does that money come from? That's at this point, that's coming out of the owner's pocket,
right?
Until and unless those tenants start paying. So it's definitely like, a challenging time. There's no doubt about it. There is talk, just today, once again, it's like a daily thing, like everything changes day to day. But like there was talk today in the LA City Council about coming up with $100 million rent, fund for people, so that would obviously be very helpful, for tenants and for landlords if that actually came about. Where they're going to get that money, who knows? These are all questions we're all wondering, but definitely, as Anthony said, we've been doing these every month, but we've basically been asked and almost forced to do them more often because the information is changing so quickly. So, and like what Tony said, definitely keep in touch with your advisors, those of us who are like on the ground, have our ear to the ground, because things are changing, and you don't want to be caught unawares and caught in a situation where you're, especially when there are opportunities for almost like free money, like the PPP, the EIDL, stuff like that, and what that means. We've applied for all those things, and it's been tremendously helpful for us. So thank you again, Tony.
Absolutely.
For speaking. Anthony, as always, it's great. And
thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Looking forward to our next session.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys. And again, if you want to catch up on this or any of our other webinars, you can find them at our YouTube channel. There's some great information there, and we'll keep updating you on when our next speaker will be. So have a great weekend. Be safe, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care. Take care.